Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of Will, What Is He Good For? I'm Victoria Gomez Wood,
I'm William Downs.
and today's very special episode is focused entirely on Classics on the Rocks main stage production for 2024, The Merry Wives of Windsor. Joining us today is a very special guest, all around amazing human, and our fearless leader, director, Rachel Purcell.
Hello! Thanks for letting me crash the podcast.
Of course. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for having much better ideas about the Merry Wives of Windsor than I could possibly ever have.
It's because I'm a woman.
In today's episode, we will talk about why this show, how this show, and give some historical context to the show, talk about Rachel's vision and what you guys can expect. So, as we get started, Will, would you be so kind as to give us some historical context for this show before we dive into all of the really fun, very specific things that will make us want to do this show as a company?
Sure. So, the first thing that I find really interesting about Merry Wives is that it's the only comedy that's set in England. All of his other comedies are set in other places, but for whatever reason, he decided to set this one in England. And then the other thing that I do find interesting is that one of the characters, Shallow, is potentially based on a real life person named Thomas Lucy. And if anybody has listened to our first season of the podcast, you would know that Thomas Lucy was the person that Shakespeare supposedly poached deer from, and he had to flee Stratford to avoid punishment. And his little bit of revenge was basing this Shallow character on him.
Spoiler alert, he stupid.
As far as the timeline and the dates, I think that's a really interesting thing too, because the play is dated anywhere between 1597 and 1602. If we think about the timeline of the canon, it does put it squarely in the middle of the Henriad. So Henry IV-1, Henry IV-2, and then Henry V are written in this time period. And the story of how this play came about was that after seeing Falstaff in the Henrys, Queen Elizabeth wanted to see another play specifically designed around Falstaff. And that's how Shakespeare decided to come up with this play and put him in Windsor. Kind of like the end scene in Shakespearean Love.
The number of times we reference that movie in the course of this venture is also comical. So, all of that for wonderful historical context. Rachel, as we throw you into this, would you like to give our audience a lovely synopsis of this play?
Sure, would be delighted to. And I'll just say, to go off of the historical context, I've always loved this play as just most purely farcical comedy, I think, of any of the works. There is such a satisfaction in Falstaff and in his cronies who also persist over from the Henriad. And it really feels, it's always felt to me like exactly what I guess perhaps Elizabeth wanted, which is this alternate reality where Falstaff gets to play again and the audience gets to be entertained by him again. And it's such a nice button to, what is otherwise a pretty tragically sad, in that it is almost unnoted ending for Falstaff within the Henry plays. But anyway, what was the actual question you asked me?
Brief synopsis.
The synopsis. Yeah.
So, Reader's Digest version, so we can talk about all the other fun stuff.
So Reader's Digest version, what happens, you kind of have the main plot is Falstaff is going to declare his love to two different wives of powerful families within Windsor. They are best friends with each other. They immediately compare letters, realize that he has written this very flattering note word for word to both of them, and decide that they will be revenged upon him for this indignity by just teaming up and messing around with him and putting him into all kinds of compromising positions. One of their husbands is himself a bit of a jokester and involved in some B plots that involve setting up other people for comical mishap. And the other one of their husbands is very jealous and his escalating reactions to Falstaff also play a big role in the plot. There are a handful of B plots involving largely one of the couple's daughters, Anne Page, who has three different suitors. Mistress Quickly, our neighborhood busybody and puppeteer, really, especially in our production. Mistress Quickly is playing all of the sides of the Anne Page courtship story. There are misbegotten attempts at duels and culminating chaos where ultimately Anne herself is going to take destiny into her own hands. So a lot going on in this play, a lot of different threads of plot, but all very funny, all very fast moving. And one of the things that's really fun about this one from the standpoint of a director or an actor, it's such an ensemble piece. There are 10 people on stage more often than not. And it is the stereotypical kind of prototypical farce, doors opening and closing and people running in and out of them. And it's so much fun.
For Rachel and Will, why now? Why this show now?
For the past 11 years, we've been saying we should do Merry Wives. So you and Sharon can play the roles of Mrs. Ford and Mistress Page. I mean, and then during Henry V, I got blindsided by you and Rachel about Merry Wives. So I would love to hear the backstory of that.
I'd say that that is, in fact, exactly how it happened. I have a long history with Classics on the Rocks as an actor and as a marketing support and also just as a hanger about, I would say. And last summer, I was in a hangabout role. I wanted to see all of the shows, all of the performances of Henry V. And so I was hanging around. I was working the front desk box office and hanging around. And on one of the evenings, Victoria and I ended up grabbing dinner and a drink or two during intermission, during Act One of the show. And we got to just reminiscing and chatting. And, last year, I believe, was the 10-year anniversary of Classics on the Rocks. Yes.
Yes, it was.
And I joined 1 year after that very first year. And in my first year with the company, I had the immense privilege of seeing Victoria and Sharon do this Mistress Page, Mistress Ford scene in our Shakespeare production. And they were just so funny and so great. And that is, of course, partly because they are both brilliant actors, but also definitely partly because they are best friends in real life. And so the friend chemistry was so real and so there. One of my very favorite things about this play, besides how hilarious it is how contemporary the friendship between these two women feels. I think that there is a lot of art and movies and TV shows now in 2024 that really does celebrate female friendship. I think that in 1590 whatever or 1600 whatever when this play was written, like not as much. And to see the way that these two characters, these two women, talk to each other and the way that their husbands tease them about how close their friendship is, it has just always stuck with me as something that is so beautiful and so weirdly validating as a contemporary woman, that this depth of female friendship really is something that is timeless and people of all centuries have experienced on some level. So with Sharon and Victoria, real life besties, playing these roles, it is that much more delightful. And I made an offhand comment or five about how I would really love to be involved should this fantasy production ever come to fruition, starring Victoria and Sharon.
After the adrenaline and just sort of like that excitement of the show wore off and settled down, and we started to actually get to thinking, this play started to make more and more sense because the second season of our podcast was all about Shakespeare and his sense on marriage. It was just like Merry Wives.
Yes, it definitely feels right.
Once we were like, okay, hey, we're doing this, I started to get to work on the play and I was going to direct it. And two things kind of hit me. As I was reading it, I had no idea what I was going to do. I think the one major note I had was Sharon and Tori go crazy. And the rest of the show is who knows. But I was also really starting to enjoy just reading Ford and thinking back to okay, well, Rachel said she wanted to get involved. I'll ask her to AD and I'll direct. I think when I originally brought it up to you, Rachel, it was something along the lines of, I'm considering / really want to read Ford or something like that. And Rachel came back with, well, I'll direct.
It was a bold move, and Will called my bluff and said, okay. And here we go.
And when we sat down and we started talking about the play, like I said, all of your ideas were far superior to anything that I could possibly think of. And here we are.
I will say I've learned much of my Shakespeare from Will over the years. We've really been working together in some way, shape, or form over about 9 years now. And there's no world in which I would have approached a project like this before that. It is the many years of working with Classics on the Rocks that I think gave me the ability to even look at a text and think about it in that way and have these spontaneous, what if we did this ridiculous thing kind of instincts.
Rachel, thank you so much for joining us, and we so hope to see you all this summer. I'm Victoria Gomez-Wood.
I'm William Downs.
And I'm Rachel Purcell.
Thank you so much for coming along with us. We'll see you next time.